They mocked Shaq's wife for demanding a custom dress, then he turned their world upside down. When Shaunie O'Neal walked into a high-end boutique, they laughed her off, judging her instead of serving her. What they didn't realize? She was the wife of the NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq didn't need to raise his voice. He let his power, influence, and strategy do the talking. By the time he was done, the boutique would never be the same again. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun cast a warm glow over Miami's luxury shopping district, where palm trees swayed gently against a cloudless blue sky. The streets were lined with high-end designer stores, their glass windows gleaming with exclusivity. Among them was Elliot's Boutique, an upscale tailor shop that prided itself on catering to the city's wealthiest clientele. Inside, the boutique was a world of muted sophistication. Soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, marble floors polished to perfection, and racks of elegant gowns displayed like museum pieces. The air smelled of expensive fabric and exclusivity. Shaunie Henderson stepped through the doors with confidence. She had been to plenty of boutiques before, but this one came highly recommended. And with the annual Miami Charity Gala just a week away, she wanted something unique, something that would make a statement. She had style, presence, and a keen eye for fashion. What she didn't have? Any idea that she was about to walk into an unwritten rule of luxury spaces, one that said, "You're only welcome if we decide you belong." At the front of the store, a tall, sharp-featured man adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket. Graham Sterling, Elliot's lead tailor, was known for two things: his impeccable craftsmanship and his insufferable arrogance. He was a man who thrived on selective service, the kind that made certain customers feel like royalty and others like they had wandered in by mistake. As Shaunie stepped inside, Graham barely spared her a glance. Instead, he continued speaking to a middle-aged woman draped in designer labels, fussing over a delicate piece of lace. "Now, Mrs. Caldwell," Graham said, voice smooth as silk. "You know we only work with the finest materials, none of that off-the-rack nonsense." Mrs. Caldwell chuckled. "Of course, Graham. I wouldn't dare." It wasn't until Shaunie approached the counter that Graham acknowledged her presence. Even then, it was with an expression that teetered between mild surprise and quiet disapproval. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone so measured it barely concealed his skepticism. Shaunie smiled, unfazed. "I'd like to get a custom dress made for the Miami Charity Gala, something elegant but with an edge." Graham blinked, as if processing whether she was serious. "A custom piece?" "Yes," Shaunie said, placing a neatly folded sketch of a dress design on the counter. "I have a specific vision in mind." Graham picked up the sketch and scanned it. His lips twitched, not in admiration, but amusement. "A bold choice," he murmured. "And this is for you?" Shaunie's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, for me." Graham exhaled through his nose, setting the paper down. "I see. Well, we specialize in timeless designs, things with sophistication. Your concept is quite unconventional." Shaunie raised an eyebrow. "Unconventional isn't a bad thing." "Perhaps," Graham replied smoothly. "But it's also about fit. You see, we curate our clients carefully. Our designs are best suited for those who—" He paused, eyes flicking over her outfit. "Match our aesthetic." There it was, the unspoken judgment. Shaunie didn't need him to spell it out. She knew exactly what he meant. Graham saw her, a black woman with curves and confidence, and decided she didn't belong in his world of waif-thin socialites draped in pastels. Still, she kept her tone even. "So, what you're saying is, you won't make my dress?" Graham gave a polite chuckle. "Oh no, dear. It's not about what we won't do, it's about exclusivity. And frankly, I just don't think your request aligns with Elliot's signature look." Shaunie stared at him for a long moment. The words were polished, the delivery smooth. But underneath it all, it was an insult. A backhanded way of saying, "You don't belong here." The other sales associates pretended not to hear, but she could feel their silent agreement. The customers nearby stole quick glances, some amused, others indifferent. Shaunie could have fought back right then, She could have reminded him exactly who she was, how her husband was one of the most influential figures in the country. But she didn't, because this wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who had ever been made to feel out of place in a space where she had every right to be. So instead, she did something Graham Sterling never expected. She smiled. "Thank you for your time," she said smoothly, grabbing her sketch. Graham gave a faintly patronizing nod. "Of course. Best of luck finding something suitable." Shaunie turned and walked out of the boutique, her head high, her pride intact. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to beg. But she was going to tell Shaq. By the time Shaunie got home, she had replayed the moment over and over in her head. She didn't consider herself someone who got caught up in petty nonsense. She wasn't the type to demand special treatment or expect people to cater to her just because of who her husband was. But this was different. This wasn't about a dress. It was about respect. She found Shaq in their living room, leaning back on the couch, scrolling through his phone. When he saw her walk in, his gaze flicked up instantly, his expression shifting. He knew her well enough to tell when something was off. "You okay?" he asked, setting his phone down. Shaunie hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "I went to Elliot's boutique today." Shaq's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That fancy spot over on Collins Avenue?" "Yeah, I wanted to get a custom dress made for the gala." Shaq nodded. "And?" Shaunie met his gaze. "The lead tailor refused, said I didn't fit their aesthetic." The air in the room shifted. Shaq didn't speak at first. He just studied her, his deep brown eyes unreadable. "You're saying they just straight up turned you down?" Shaunie gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not in those words. But yeah, pretty much." Shaq exhaled, his jaw tightening. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Graham Sterling," Shaunie replied. Shaq let the name settle in his mind. He wasn't the type to jump into drama. He didn't waste time on petty fights. But this? This was disrespect. And disrespect had consequences. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, finally, he leaned back, grabbing his phone again. Shaunie eyed him, curious. "What are you doing?" Shaq's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "Making a few calls." And just like that, the game had officially changed. The sun had started its slow descent over Miami, casting an orange glow across the skyline. Inside Shaq and Shaunie's luxurious waterfront home, the air smelled faintly of vanilla from the candle burning on the marble counter. The house was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of waves lapping against the dock outside. Shaunie set her purse down carefully, her fingers lingering on the strap longer than usual. She wasn't someone who held on to negativity, but something about what had happened at Elliot's boutique sat heavy in her chest. She could hear Shaq's deep voice from the other room. He was on the couch, phone in one massive hand, scrolling through ESPN updates. Normally this was when she'd flop down beside him, maybe steal his phone just to mess with him. But tonight, she hesitated. Because she knew Shaq. She knew the moment she told him what had happened, it wouldn't just be another conversation. Shaq barely looked up as he heard her heels click softly against the tile floor. "You're home early," he said, still focused on his phone. Shaunie forced a smile. "Yeah, I decided not to stay out too long." That made him pause. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, scanning her face with the same sharpness he had on the court. Shaq wasn't just big in stature, he was big in awareness. He could read people without them saying a word, and right now, something was off. "You good?" His voice was calm, but she could hear the shift in his tone. Shaunie walked over and sat beside him, tucking one leg under the other. "Of course," she said lightly. "Just a long day." Shaq's eyes stayed on her. He wasn't buying it. Shaunie sighed, glancing down at her hands. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. She really didn't. But she also didn't want to lie. So she chose her words carefully. "I went to Elliot's boutique today," she said casually. Shaq nodded. "The fancy place on Collins?" "Yeah, I wanted to get a custom dress made for the gala." Shaq smirked, already knowing where this was going. "Let me guess, they tried to sell you something ugly and overpriced?" Shaunie let out a small laugh but shook her head. Worse, they refused. Shaq's smirk faded. What? Shaunie exhaled, rubbing her temple. The lead tailor, Graham Sterling. He looked at me, looked at my design, and basically said I don't fit their aesthetic. The room went still. Shaq sat up a little straighter, his face unreadable. Say that again. Shaunie met his eyes. He refused to make my dress. Said it wasn't sophisticated enough. That their boutique only caters to a certain type of client. The words hung in the air between them. Shaq's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Shaunie rushed to fill the silence. Babe, it's not that serious. It's just a dress. Shaq's jaw tightened slightly. It ain't about the dress, Shaunie. She knew that. She had seen the way those employees at the boutique had looked at her. She had felt the subtle judgment. And now? Shaq was feeling it too. But the difference between them? Shaunie had let it go. Shaq? He wasn't wired that way. Shaq leaned back against the couch, his mind already working. He didn't get loud. He didn't rant. He just sat there for a second, letting the situation sink in. This wasn't just some store refusing a design. This was about who they chose to respect and who they didn't. Shaq had spent his entire career breaking barriers, on and off the court. He had watched people judge him before knowing him, assume he was just another athlete with money but no class. And now, they had done the same thing to his wife. Wrong move. After a long pause, Shaq finally spoke. What's his name again? Shaunie hesitated. Graham Sterling. Shaq nodded, tapping his fingers against his knee. All right. Shaunie frowned. All right what? Shaq stretched his arms, grabbing his phone from the coffee table. I'ma handle it. Shaq, Shaunie warned, sitting up. It's really not worth the drama. Shaq met her gaze, his eyes steady. Who said anything about drama? Shaunie narrowed her eyes. I know that look. That's your I'm about to shut something down look. Shaq chuckled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Nah, I ain't shutting nothing down. He unlocked his phone. I'm just making some calls. Shaunie groaned. Babe, you don't have to do anything. I promise you. Graham Sterling is just another stuck-up tailor who thinks he's more important than he is. Shaq didn't look up as he scrolled through his contacts. And I'm just a millionaire who thinks he's about to learn a lesson. Shaunie sighed, leaning back against the couch. There was no stopping him now. Shaq's first call was to his business manager, Carl. Yo, Carl answered, half distracted. What's up, big man? You know Elliot's boutique? Carl paused. Yeah, the high-end spot. Why? Shaq's voice was calm, even. I need every detail on the owner. Who funds them? Who they work with? Who their biggest clients are? Carl whistled. Damn. That bad? Shaq leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Let's just say, they forgot who they were dealing with. Carl chuckled. Give me an hour. Call 1. Done. Shaq's next call was to a renowned designer friend, Olivia Banks, one of the most sought-after black designers in the industry. Shaq, Olivia answered, excited. You finally ready to let me revamp your whole wardrobe? Shaq smirked. Not today, Liv, but I do need a favor. I'm listening. You ever work with Elliot's boutique? Olivia's excitement dimmed. Elliot's? Please, those people only respect one kind of client. Shaq nodded, already knowing the answer. That's what I thought. Why? What happened? Shaq exhaled slowly. They disrespected Shaunie. Silence. Then Olivia's voice turned cold. Say no more. I'm in. What do you need? Shaq leaned back against the couch, his lips curling into a small, knowing smile. Just be ready when I call. By the time Shaq set his phone down, his mind was already 10 steps ahead. This wasn't going to be some angry public confrontation. This was going to be silent, calculated, and unforgettable. Because if there was one thing Shaq knew how to do, it was flipping the script. And by the time he was done, Graham Sterling was going to wish he had kept his mouth shut. Graham Sterling stood in the center of Elliot's boutique, sipping an espresso from a fine china cup, his gaze drifting lazily across the showroom. The boutique was quiet this morning. just the way he liked it. Sunlight filtered through the oversized windows, reflecting off polished marble floors. Racks of delicately beaded gowns and sharply tailored suits surrounded him, each piece carefully curated for the right kind of clientele. Graham took another slow sip, savoring the rich bitterness. His reflection in the glass case across the room was immaculate, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his custom-fitted navy blue suit draped effortlessly over his frame. To the outside world, he was the epitome of refinement and exclusivity. To those who worked under him, he was ruthless, arrogant, and selective about who deserved his expertise. And Graham liked it that way. Ah, Graham. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. Victoria Caldwell, one of his most loyal clients, stepped into the showroom, her heels clicking against the floor. Graham set down his cup and gave her a tight smile. Mrs. Caldwell, as always, a vision. Victoria waved a hand, brushing off the compliment. Oh, stop it. But you must tell me, how is my gown coming along? Flawless, of course, Graham said, leading her toward a private fitting area. Only the finest fabrics for my most elite clients. Victoria grinned. That's what I love about this place. No riffraff. Graham chuckled, smoothing a hand over the sleeve of his suit. Exclusivity is the foundation of true luxury, Mrs. Caldwell. Victoria nodded approvingly before lowering her voice. I heard a rather interesting story about yesterday. A woman came in. And you turned her away? Graham smirked, already knowing exactly who she was referring to. Ah, yes. A Mrs. O'Neal, I believe. Victoria's brow lifted. O'Neal? As in... Graham waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't be dramatic. Yes, she's married to that basketball player, but money doesn't equal taste. She came in with some bold design idea, completely lacking refinement. It would have been a disaster to attach our name to it. Victoria gasped in mock horror. Imagine the scandal. Exactly, Graham said, his smirk widening. We don't just make dresses, Mrs. Caldwell. We curate an image. If someone doesn't fit into the world we create... He gestured vaguely, as if wiping something insignificant from existence. Victoria laughed. And that's why we trust you, darling. Meanwhile, across the boutique, two employees exchanged glances. Olivia and Daniel had been working at Elliott's for over a year, and neither of them was new to Graham's standards. But something about this was different. Olivia lowered her voice. Did you hear how he talked to her yesterday? Like she wasn't even worth his time. Daniel nodded. It's not the first time. He's done this before, just never to someone this high profile. They both knew the unspoken rules of Elliott's boutique, the kind of clients who were welcomed with champagne and the kind who were shown the door with a polite excuse. And while it had always been a quiet form of exclusivity, Graham had gotten bolder, more open about his personal definition of luxury. It wasn't about money. It was about who looked the part. Back in the fitting room, Graham continued his conversation with Victoria. You know, he mused, adjusting a silk cufflink. I believe luxury should be earned. If they don't look like first class, they don't deserve first class. Victoria laughed, sipping from the complimentary champagne glass she had been handed. And that's why your boutique is untouchable, darling. Some people just don't belong. Graham smiled smugly, but what he didn't know? His past actions were about to catch up with him. An hour later, Graham walked through the boutique, hands tucked into his pockets, still riding the high of his own self-importance. But as he approached the front desk, Olivia's voice stopped him. Mr. Sterling? We have a situation. Graham frowned, irritated by the disruption. What kind of situation? Olivia hesitated before sliding her phone across the counter. You might want to see this. Graham took the phone, his annoyance shifting to confusion as he stared at the screen. A social media post, a video, a clip of him, standing in this very boutique, saying those exact words. If they don't look like first class, they don't deserve first class. Graham's stomach twisted. The post had already racked up thousands of views, and the comments? Not kind. Comment section. Wow, so luxury isn't about quality, it's about discrimination. Imagine thinking you're above people because of how they look. This guy's career is over. Shaquille O'Neal's wife was treated like this. Y'all just disrespected the wrong family. Let's see how exclusive your boutique is when no one shops there anymore." Graham set the phone down very, very carefully. His mind raced. How? Who? He looked up at Olivia and Daniel, who were suddenly very busy avoiding eye contact. "Where did this come from?" Graham demanded, his voice sharp. Olivia shrugged, too innocently. "Guess someone must have been recording." Graham's pulse pounded. This wasn't just some bad review. This was an exposure, a scandal. And in a world where public image was everything, one thing was certain. His carefully built empire was starting to crumble. This wasn't about revenge. This was about correction. Graham Sterling had made a mistake, one he had made too many times before. But this time, he picked the wrong person to dismiss. And Shaq? He wasn't the type to let disrespect slide. So instead of storming into the boutique, demanding an apology, he did something better. He set a trap. Shaq's first call was to Carl Reynolds, his business manager. "I need a favor," Shaq said, voice calm but firm. Carl chuckled. "A favor from you? This must be serious." Shaq smirked. "You know Elliot's boutique?" Carl groaned. "Oh boy, I heard about what happened with Shaunie. Twitter's already dragging them." "Yeah," Shaq said, tapping his fingers against the table. "But I ain't done yet." Carl leaned forward on his end of the line. "What's the play?" Shaq exhaled slowly. "I need them to think a big client is coming in, a VIP, someone they wouldn't dare turn away." Carl caught on immediately. "You want them to roll out the red carpet without knowing it's for you." Shaq grinned. "Exactly." Carl didn't even hesitate. "Consider it done." The next morning, Elliot's boutique was buzzing. Olivia and Daniel, the two employees who had secretly been rooting against Graham, were shocked when they saw the sudden change in energy. The staff was scrambling, dusting off displays, steaming dresses, making sure every inch of the boutique looked flawless. "Did we miss something?" Olivia whispered to Daniel. Daniel shrugged, watching as Graham strutted through the store, barking orders. "No idea, but Graham's acting like royalty is coming through that door." And in a way, he wasn't wrong. Graham straightened his tie as he glanced at his watch. "Everyone in position," he instructed, running a hand over the lapel of his suit. His assistant, Lydia, hurried over, eyes wide. "Mr. Sterling, the client's team just called. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Graham smirked. "Perfect. Did they give a name?" Lydia shook her head. "No, sir. They just said he's a private collector with a reputation for luxury." That was all Graham needed to hear. This was the kind of client he built Elliot's boutique for. Wealthy, elite, exclusive. Exactly the opposite of Shaunie O'Neal. When the boutique's doors finally opened, Graham's confidence was at an all-time high. But the moment Shaquille O'Neal stepped inside, the blood drained from his face. The entire store fell silent. Every employee, every customer, froze. Olivia and Daniel exchanged wide-eyed glances. Lydia, still holding a clipboard, looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. And Graham? He looked like he had seen a ghost. For the first time in his career, he was speechless. Shaq didn't move right away. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of his presence sink in. Graham swallowed hard, regaining just enough composure to force a smile. "Mr. O'Neal." Shaq simply looked at him. Not a single word. Just a look. And somehow, it was louder than anything he could have said. Graham cleared his throat, desperately trying to recover. What brings you in today?" Shaq took a slow step forward, his 6'11" frame towering over Graham's carefully polished confidence. "Y'all were expecting a VIP, right?" Shaq's voice was calm, steady. Graham's hands twitched at his sides. "Of course. We were told a high-profile client was arriving. I wasn't expecting..." Shaq tilted his head slightly. "Wasn't expecting what?" Graham hesitated. He knew there was no right answer. The tension in the boutique was suffocating. Shaq took another step closer. "See, I heard you had some thoughts about who belongs in first-class luxury." Graham's jaw clenched. "There must be some Shaq held up a finger, silencing him instantly. "Let me help you out," Shaq said, voice dropping just a little lower. Not loud, Not threatening, just final. You turned away my wife. A ripple of shock moved through the boutique. Shaq didn't blink. You told her she didn't fit your aesthetic, that her design wasn't luxury enough for you. Graham's breath hitched. Mr. O'Neal, I assure you it was never personal. We simply maintain a certain standard. Shaq gave a small nod. A certain standard. He let the words sit for a moment, then exhaled. Cool. Let me tell you what my standard is. Graham stiffened. Shaq leaned in slightly, his voice smooth as silk. Respect. Graham swallowed hard. Shaq tilted his head. Tell me, how much does respect cost in your boutique? Or is that only reserved for the right kind of clients? Graham opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because there was no way out of this. Shaq could have raised his voice. He could have called for Graham's job, for a public apology, for the whole world to watch him crumble. But he didn't. Because real power didn't need to be loud. Shaq straightened, adjusting the sleeve of his suit. Don't worry, Graham. I ain't here to argue. Graham let out a shaky breath, relief flickering in his eyes. But then, Shaq smiled. And that was worse. I'm just here to let you know, Shaq continued, voice slow, deliberate, that things are about to change around here. Graham blinked. What do you mean? Shaq pulled out his phone, glanced at the time. You'll find out soon enough. And with that, he turned, walked out, leaving behind a man who just realized he had messed with the wrong family. The moment the door swung shut behind Shaq, panic erupted. Graham turned to Lydia, his voice sharp. Get me on the phone with Elliot, now. Olivia and Daniel exchanged looks, because they knew. This wasn't just some celebrity walking into the store. This was Shaquille O'Neal. And if he was involved, then Graham Sterling's reign over Elliot's boutique was about to end. The boutique's atmosphere, once filled with quiet luxury, had turned tense and suffocating. Employees moved carefully, avoiding sudden movements, as if the weight of Shaquille O'Neal's presence alone had altered the gravity of the room. Graham Sterling stood behind the sleek glass display counter, his perfectly tailored suit now feeling stiff and suffocating. His mind raced for control of the situation, but his usual smooth arrogance wasn't working this time. Because this wasn't just any client standing in front of him. This was Shaq, and Shaq wasn't here to browse. Shaq adjusted his cuff, slow and deliberate, before glancing at Graham. So, you want to tell me what exactly makes someone worthy of your so-called luxury? Graham swallowed, his throat dry. He forced a polite chuckle, but it came out weak. Mr. O'Neal, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Shaq raised an eyebrow, silent. Graham cleared his throat and pressed on. Elliot's boutique has a long-standing reputation for exclusivity. We carefully select designs that align with our brand's aesthetic. It's not about who the customer is, but rather, well, the artistic integrity of our work. Shaq exhaled slowly. Artistic integrity. Yes, Graham nodded quickly. Exactly. Shaq leaned slightly against the counter, his sheer size making the space shrink around Graham. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice steady, deep, controlled. How much do your clients usually spend here? Graham blinked, caught off guard. Well, our custom pieces start at around $25,000. Shaq nodded, as if filing away the information. And you think my wife can't afford that? Graham stiffened. No, I never said that. You didn't have to, Shaq said simply. A long, painful pause. Shaq crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. So what's the real reason you turned her away? Graham hesitated. I didn't turn her away per se. Shaq's brow lifted. Graham stammered. I mean, her design choice didn't quite align with our boutique's signature style. Shaq let out a slow, quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. So you judged her taste? Graham nodded quickly, clinging to that excuse like a lifeline. Precisely. Shaq's smile faded. Not her money? Graham shifted his weight. No, of course not. Shaq tilted his head slightly. Not her status? Certainly not, Graham said, forcing another strained chuckle. Shaq's voice dropped just enough to send chills down the spine. Not her skin? Graham's throat tightened. The boutique fell into an unnatural silence. Across the store, Olivia and Daniel, two employees who had watched Graham's elitist, discriminatory behavior for months, felt the shift in power. Shaq hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't yelled, threatened, or caused a scene. But he didn't have to, because the truth was already exposed. Graham, once a man who handpicked his clientele like he was choosing fine wine, now stood completely cornered. And there was no way out. "Mr. O'Neal," Graham tried, grasping at professionalism, "I can assure you, we have nothing but the utmost respect for our clients." Shaq cut him off, his voice calm but absolute. "You sure about that?" Graham's face paled slightly. Shaq pulled out his phone, tapping the screen once. He turned it toward Graham, revealing a video, one that had already gone viral. It was footage from inside Elliot's boutique. And on that video? Graham's own voice, clear as day. "If they don't look like first class, they don't deserve first class." The boutique staff froze. Graham's entire body went rigid. Shaq tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You recognize that?" Graham's mouth opened, but no words came out. Shaq exhaled through his nose. "Damn shame. That's your artistic integrity?" Graham's lips trembled slightly. Mr. O'Neal, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," Shaq interrupted, his voice sharp but never raised. And now, the whole world heard it. A heavy silence settled over the room. Shaq pocketed his phone and looked Graham directly in the eye. "You want to talk about luxury? Let's talk about it." Graham swallowed hard, too afraid to respond. Shaq leaned in slightly. "Luxury ain't just about price tags, silk, and champagne, man. It's about respect." Graham's hands twitched, gripping the counter like he was holding on to the last thread of his career. Shaq didn't blink. "Luxury is treating people like they belong before you know their name, before you know their bank account, before you realize they're married to me." Graham looked like he might actually collapse. Shaq straightened, adjusting his sleeve, exhaling like he was done wasting energy on this conversation. "You don't gotta worry about my wife coming back here," he said simply. Graham nodded quickly, looking relieved. But he shouldn't have been, because Shaq wasn't finished. He turned slightly, looking toward Olivia and Daniel. "Y'all ever worked somewhere that actually values people?" The two employees looked at each other, hesitant. Shaq smirked. "Good. You won't have to wait much longer." Graham frowned, confused. Shaq checked his watch. "You've got about, I'd say 2 hours before the big names in fashion start dropping your boutique like a bad stock investment." Graham's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to argue, but buzzed. His phone vibrated violently on the counter. Then again, and again. Message after message. "Elliot's PR team. Call us immediately. Crisis management needed. Investor board. We need to discuss today's viral video. This is bad. Luxury client." "Graham, are these accusations true?" Graham's hand shook as he reached for the phone, but it didn't stop buzzing. It was already happening. Shaq took one final look at him. "You judged the wrong person," he said, shaking his head. "Now let's see if you still belong in first class." With that, he turned, leaving Graham in the ruins of his own arrogance. And this was only the beginning. Graham Sterling had built his career on exclusivity. For years, he had crafted an image of himself as a gatekeeper of luxury, deciding who was worthy of his boutique's services. His clients weren't just rich, they were selected. His designs weren't just expensive, they were reserved for the right people. But today the world was watching him unravel in real time. Inside Elliot's boutique, Graham gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. The constant vibration of notifications made his heart pound. Every time he glanced at the screen, the situation had gotten worse. "Elliot's PR team. Call us immediately. This is a disaster. Investor board. Damage control now. This scandal is sinking our stock. Luxury. Client. Graham, is it true you refused Shaquille O'Neal's wife? This is all over social media. Celebrity stylist. I won't be using your boutique anymore. Gross behavior." The boutique, once a quiet temple of wealth and refinement, now felt claustrophobic. suffocating. The whispers of his employees, the way customers stared at him, it all felt like a noose tightening around his career. And the worst part? Shaquille O'Neal hadn't even raised his voice. Meanwhile, online, the fire was spreading. It had started with a single tweet, a clip from inside the boutique, where Graham had smugly declared, "If they don't look like first class, they don't deserve first class." By the time Shaq left the boutique, the video had already racked up hundreds of thousands of views. By the time he got home, it had passed 1 million. And by the time Graham finally sat down to figure out how to fix this mess, it was too late. Twitter trending topics. Boycott Elliot's boutique, 300K tweets. Respect is luxury, 500K tweets. Shaq didn't even have to say a word. Graham Sterling buried himself. The real Shay, 1.2 million followers. So let me get this straight. A tailor refused service to Shaquille O'Neal's wife because she didn't fit the aesthetic? Brother, pack it up. Justice matters, 3.5 million followers. This isn't just about Shaunie O'Neal. Graham Sterling has a history of discriminating against people who don't look the way he wants. We see you, Graham, and we're done. NBA Fanatics, 4.1 million followers. Graham fumbled so hard. Imagine disrespecting Shaq's family and thinking you'd get away with it. And then came the real destruction. Other customers, ones Graham had brushed off, disrespected, or ignored, started coming forward. Exposing Graham Sterling, Ella Monroe Fashion, luxury stylist, 250,000 followers. Not shocked. Graham once told my plus-size client that certain designs weren't flattering for her body type. Disgusting. Boycott Elliot's. High Fashion Haley, influencer, 800K followers. He literally told me they don't cater to Instagram fashion. Sir, my brand makes more money than your boutique. LMAO, Mr. and Mrs. Style, couples fashion blog, 1.1 million followers. We tried to get a custom wedding suit from Graham. He flat out told my husband, "Your look isn't right for our tailoring." We walked out. Back in the boutique, Graham ran a shaky hand through his hair. His entire brand was built on status, prestige, exclusivity. And now, he was becoming untouchable, but in the worst way possible. His phone kept ringing, but every call was just another nail in the coffin. Investor board, we're pulling funding, you've become a liability. Luxury clients, we'll be taking our business elsewhere. Elliot's CEO, you're fired. And then came the final blow. A new tweet surfaced, one that made Graham's stomach drop. It was from Shaquille O'Neal. And it wasn't angry. It wasn't harsh. It was just a single sentence. Respect should be luxury's foundation, not its price tag. No hashtags, no callouts. Just a lesson Graham should have learned before it was too late. The boutique was silent now. Graham looked up at his employees. Olivia and Daniel stared at him, their expressions unreadable. Even Lydia, his once loyal assistant, wouldn't meet his eyes. The power he once had over this space? Gone. The boutique's doors swung open, and 2 corporate representatives walked in. Elliot's CEO's people. One of them, a woman in a crisp black suit, approached Graham with a stack of papers. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone cool and professional. "Your services are no longer required at Elliot's boutique. Effective immediately." Graham's pulse pounded in his ears. You can't fire me," he sputtered. "I built this boutique." The woman arched a brow. "No, Mr. Elliot built this boutique. You just ruined it." And just like that, it was over. Meanwhile, at Shaq's house, Shaunie sat on the couch, scrolling through Twitter. Every few seconds, her phone buzzed with another notification, another tag, another article. Shaq walked in, towel around his shoulders from a post-workout shower. "How's it looking out there?" Shaunie smirked. "Well, Graham Sterling won't be working in fashion anytime soon." Shaq grabbed a bottle of water from the kitchen, taking a slow sip. "Told you I'd handle it." Shaunie grinned. "Yeah, but I thought you meant like a stern conversation, not a full-blown career meltdown." Shaq chuckled. "I ain't do nothin'. He did that to himself." And he was right. Shaq hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't shouted. He just let the world see Graham Sterling for who he really was. And in the end, that was the worst punishment of all. The fall of Graham Sterling had been swift and brutal. The man who once considered himself the gatekeeper of high fashion was now a pariah in the industry he worshipped. The backlash wasn't just online anymore. Luxury clients had pulled their accounts. Designers refused to work with him. His name had become toxic in the world of high-end fashion. But Graham wasn't going down without a fight. So, in a last-ditch effort to save what little reputation he had left, he did what every disgraced businessman does. He issued a public apology. Graham Sterling's statement, live press conference. Graham sat at a long mahogany conference table, cameras flashing in front of him. His once perfectly styled hair was slightly out of place, and there was an edge of desperation in his voice as he spoke. I want to sincerely apologize for my words and actions. They do not reflect the values of Elliot's boutique, nor do they represent who I am as a person. I regret any hurt I have caused, and I am committed to learning from this experience. He paused, glancing at his PR manager, as if searching for approval. I will be stepping away from my role at Elliot's boutique effective immediately. I hope to use this time to reflect, grow, and contribute positively to the fashion industry. The reporters didn't buy it, the public didn't buy it, and most importantly, Shaq didn't buy it. The press conference ended, but Shaq wasn't done yet. Because unlike Graham, Shaq didn't just believe in damage control, he believed in fixing things for real. The next move. A week after Graham's pathetic apology, Elliot's boutique was officially up for sale. The board members, desperate to cut ties with the scandal, were looking for a quick buyer. Someone with money, power, and, most importantly, credibility. And who better than Shaquille O'Neal? When the deal closed, the fashion world went into a frenzy. Breaking news: Shaquille O'Neal buys out Elliot's boutique. Graham Sterling era is over. Headline: From gatekeeping to groundbreaking, Shaq's next big play is in fashion. But Shaq didn't buy the boutique to settle a grudge. He bought it to change the game. Inside the boutique, the day everything changed. Graham's old staff stood nervous and uncertain as Shaq walked through the boutique for the first time as its new owner. Shaq didn't make a big announcement. He didn't deliver some intimidating speech. He just looked around. The store still felt like Graham. The cold, elitist atmosphere. The way employees avoided eye contact with certain customers. The way they only seemed to brighten up when someone important walked in. That was going to change. The new team. The first thing Shaq did? He fired Graham's loyalists. Every employee who had sneered at Shaunie, every staff member who had enforced Graham's toxic culture. Gone. In their place? Shaq brought in new talent. Real talent. Designers from diverse backgrounds, with fresh perspectives. Tailors who valued craft over classism. Stylists who believed fashion should empower, not exclude. And as for Olivia and Daniel, the two employees who had seen Graham's downfall coming, they weren't just kept on staff. Shaq promoted them. The grand reopening. A month later, the boutique had transformed. No more cold, intimidating atmosphere. No more silent judgment. The once exclusive store now had an entirely new mission. Official statement from Shaquille O'Neal, the new Elliot's boutique. Luxury isn't about turning people away. It's about bringing people in. Fashion should make you feel powerful, not small. This boutique isn't about exclusivity anymore. It's about excellence for everyone. The fashion world took notice. Clients who had once walked away from Elliot's boutique now rushed to see what Shaq had built. And the best part? Shaunie was the first to walk through the doors. This time, when she asked for a custom dress, no one questioned her. No one dismissed her. Because now, she belonged, and she always had. The night of the Miami Charity Gala had finally arrived. The city glowed under a blanket of golden lights, luxury cars lining up outside the grand event hall. Photographers, reporters, and elite guests filled the venue, their conversations buzzing with excitement. But tonight, there was one name on everyone's lips: Shaunie O'Neal. Because this wasn't just any entrance, this was a statement. And when she stepped out of the sleek black Rolls-Royce, the entire night shifted. Shaunie O'Neal had always carried herself with grace, but tonight she was unstoppable. She wore a stunning, custom-made gown, a design she had envisioned weeks ago, the very one that Graham Sterling had refused to create. The dress was crafted by one of the new tailors at Elliot's boutique, a young designer with talent that had been overlooked for far too long under Graham's rule. The gown was a deep midnight blue, flowing like liquid silk, with intricate gold embroidery that shimmered under the lights. A daring off-the-shoulder cut, paired with a dramatic train, made her look like she belonged on a royal throne. Her confidence wasn't just in the way she walked, it was in the way she owned the room before she even stepped inside. The moment Shaunie entered the gala, conversation stopped. Eyes followed her, whispers spread like wildfire. "Who designed that dress?" someone murmured. "Didn't she try to get a custom gown from Graham Sterling?" another asked. "That's not a Graham Sterling piece," a woman whispered, shaking her head. "That's something else. That's better." Shaunie smiled to herself. It wasn't just better. It was proof. Proof that talent was everywhere, not just in the hands of the privileged few. Proof that Graham Sterling was never the gatekeeper of luxury. He was just another man who thought he could decide who belonged. And tonight, he wasn't even invited. Graham Sterling's fall from grace. Across the gala, standing near the bar, Graham Sterling watched from the sidelines. He had no expensive suit, no VIP pass, no power. Just a cheap rental tuxedo and a front row seat to his own irrelevance. He had barely managed to sneak into the event, using an old connection, but no one was paying attention to him. No one was greeting him, praising him, asking for his designs. Because Graham Sterling didn't matter anymore. And as he watched Shaunie command the room, standing taller than ever in a dress he had once called unworthy of his boutique, he felt the weight of his downfall settle in. He had lost everything: his reputation, his clients, his position as Miami's go-to fashion expert. And worst of all, the world had moved on without him. A moment of justice. Shaunie walked through the venue, stopping to greet guests, accept compliments, and pose for photos. When she finally locked eyes with Graham across the room, she didn't need to say a word. Her smile, calm, confident, knowing, was enough. Graham looked away first, because deep down, he understood. This wasn't just Shaunie's night. This was his reminder. That real luxury isn't about exclusivity. It's about excellence. And tonight, Shaunie was luxury, and he was nothing. The night of the Miami Charity Gala had come and gone, but its impact lingered. Shaunie's entrance had been legendary. The whispers, the stolen glances, the realization that real talent had been ignored for too long. It had all played out exactly as Shaq had planned. But this wasn't about a single night. This was about changing the game forever. Shaq's reflection. The truth about luxury. A few days later, Shaq sat on the balcony of his Miami home, overlooking the ocean as the early morning sun painted streaks of orange and gold across the sky. He held his coffee mug in one massive hand, scrolling through the latest headlines with the other. Shaquille O'Neal's fashion takeover. A new era of luxury. Elliot's boutique reinvented, from elitism to excellence. Graham Sterling vanishes from the fashion scene. For good. Shaq smirked. The boutique was thriving under its new leadership. Olivia and Daniel had stepped up as store directors, bringing in fresh talent and ensuring that the boutique's new mission wasn't just a marketing gimmick. It was real. Shaunie's dress? It had sparked a fashion movement. Stylists, designers, and influencers were praising the boutique's new designs, finally recognizing the talent that Graham had ignored. And Graham himself? He had faded into irrelevance. Shaunie joins him on the balcony. The sliding glass door behind Shaq opened, and Shaunie stepped outside, holding her own cup of tea. She was still glowing from the success of the gala, but more than that, she was at peace. She sat down next to Shaq, tucking her legs under herself. "You've been quiet all morning," she said, watching him with a knowing smile. Shaq chuckled, setting his phone down. "Just thinking." Shaunie sipped her tea. "About what?" Shaq leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the horizon. "About what luxury really means." Shaunie raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Shaq exhaled. "People like Graham. They think luxury is about status, price tags, exclusivity. But that's not it." Shaunie listened, letting him process his thoughts. Shaq tapped his fingers against his coffee mug. Luxury isn't about shutting people out. It should be about lifting people up, making them feel like they belong. Shaunie smiled. I think you just redefined the whole industry, Mr. O'Neal. Shaq smirked. Damn right. Meanwhile, back at Elliot's boutique, the transformation was in full swing. New designers, fresh voices, diverse talent were finally getting their shot. Clients of all backgrounds felt welcomed instead of judged. The boutique, once known for its exclusivity, was now known for its innovation. Shaq didn't just buy the store, he changed what it stood for. He didn't just teach Graham Sterling a lesson. He made sure the lesson lasted. Final scene. A simple but powerful question. A week later, Shaq stood inside the boutique, watching as a young designer fitted a first-time client for a custom dress. The woman, once hesitant, now looked at herself in the mirror with awe in her eyes. She belonged here. She always had. Shaq turned to Olivia, nodding in approval. You've done good, he said. Olivia smiled. You started it. Shaq grinned. Nah. I just made sure people got the respect they always deserved. As he turned to leave, he glanced at the boutique's new gold-lettered sign above the entrance. It didn't just say Elliot's Boutique anymore. It said something more important. Luxury is respect. And as Shaq walked out into the Miami sun, his final thought was simple. Next time you judge someone by their appearance, ask yourself, what does real luxury look like? Shaq didn't just call out injustice. He changed the game. Now it's your turn. Support brands that value people over prestige. Speak up when you see bias, because silence lets it thrive. Share this story and ask, what does real luxury mean to you? Respect shouldn't be exclusive. It should be the standard. Let's make sure the world knows it.